Hello, I'm Claire Poole and welcome to the Climate of Sport podcast, the show in which you get the inside track on all things sport and sustainability globally. Join me every week where I'll be chatting to a special guest about news, opinion and insights on how sport is moving to a more environmentally friendly future or taking action on climate change. Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Climate of Sport podcast with me, Claire Poole. I'm delighted this week to be joined by Katie Cross, founder of Pledgeball. Katie, it's lovely to have you with us.
It's really nice to be here.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you. It's a pleasure to have you and delighted to bring you on to talk about the work that you're doing because it's really, really interesting and exciting. So for those who perhaps haven't heard loads about you or Pledgeball, why don't you tell us a little background about you in terms of who you are, your background, and how you've got to where you are right now?
Lovely. Okay, I will kick it off. So I actually started as a teacher. So I taught secondary school science, background in biology, did that for a good few years and then joined a charity called Kids Company. So you may know Kids Company. They did anecdotally some amazing work, mostly around supporting very young, very vulnerable youngsters or children between 18 and 25. And I ran a centre for young people who'd been permanently excluded from school over in Knoll West in Bristol. And I really loved the work there, actually. Then the whole Pledgeball thing came about completely, I think, accidentally. There was no kind of plans for it to become what it has become. Which I think probably has certain benefits, to be honest. So I started playing football in my late 20s, just simply because I wanted to find a team sport. I started playing with my husband, some of his friends, ended up with some, pretty epic bruises and a broken arm.
Committed.
I mean, I think that's probably the main word for me and my skill. And then after I'd kind of had a break to have children, a lot of people around me, particularly those closest to me, started to feel this real despair in the face of climate change. And obviously, having done a degree in biology, a lot of conservation, it's always been something that has been a thread. I've always had a very good understanding of it. But I think the aspect that I'd never really considered was how people respond to it. And I think also there's a kind of danger in that if you are constantly told about it, you almost become numb to it. You think, oh, well, this is something I always teach, etc. You don't really fully grasp the implications. And also you look at the world around you and people aren't responding as you think they maybe would respond in light of what you know about climate change. So then when I started to see this despair, I personally started to research what we as individuals could do, what action we could take, really as a way of facing this despair that I felt, that those closest to me felt. And I started looking at the carbon savings associated with that. I started looking at things like Project Drawdown. And I actually shared some of this with the football team I'd then joined. So I joined this wonderful football team called the Misfits, who are part of Bristol Women's Casual League. And when you share that information, or when I shared it, the information, the response that came back was really quite surprising. I didn't know them that well at the time. There's a group of about 45 women there. And everybody came back with questions or with interest. And I'd been nervous about sharing it, to be honest, because I wasn't sure what the response would be. But actually, when I shared it, they also found the stats really empowering, because when you plug in carbon savings into statistics associated with football, actually the numbers that you get back are really quite empowering, and particularly when you look at that on a professional level. And that in itself starts to shift people's thinking in relation to climate change. And so then we set up a tournament, which was our Pledgeball tournament, which was just a grassroots tournament. And I think actually subsequently to that, I spoke with you, Claire.
I was going to say, I think it was like, it was early 2019-ish. And I remember you contacted me and just saying, I'm thinking about doing this. Can we have a chat? And we had a chat. And then I was like, can I connect you with some other people in football who might be able to help or be involved or whatever. So just another great connection.
It was exactly that. Yeah. And then it kind of went from there. And, I'm sure we'll touch upon it later, but obviously we had this, because again, it had been something that had essentially come up through my football team and me. It was an idea. It wasn't based on any research. We then wanted to thoroughly check that what we were doing worked. But it went from there, really. We started to then launch with semi-professional clubs, professional clubs, with supporters groups who are advocating for climate action, and it's just grown from there.
Incredible. So for those who perhaps aren't familiar, we obviously have listeners all over the world. For those who aren't familiar, what is Pledgeball?
So Pledgeball is a way of rallying fellow fans to take climate action. And this is about inspiring individual action as part of that collective. So feeling very much and seeing that you are part of a collective of individuals taking action.
Yeah. So, and at the moment, predominantly in football, soccer here in the UK.
Exactly right. Yeah. I mean, we do have a key partner called Spirit of Football, which will actually take this more internationally. Mm-hmm. And we're doing quite a big piece of research around that to look at the global relevance of the pledges that we work with. Yeah. But yes, at the moment, we are focused primarily on the UK.
Yeah. And tell us about give a run through about, so it's about fans rallying action, but that can take so many different roles. What does someone do if they were involved with Pledgeball? Like, how does the actual mechanic work? And then talk to us as well around, so tell us about the mechanic first, so we can understand how that actually works, and then the rationale behind a pledge.
Perfect. Okay. Claire, do you support a team, by the way?
Yes, I do. I support Liverpool Football Club.
Oh, another one. I know. Okay. So as a Liverpool fan,
yeah,
what you do is on match day, you would want to go and support your team to win both on and off the pitch, because essentially Pledgeball is integrated into match day. So whilst your team competes on the pitch, essentially it allows fans to compete off the pitch. And the way in which they compete is that they pledge off against the other team. So you'd go to pledgeball.org/fixtures, and you'd search for Liverpool and you'd find the Liverpool fixtures that are coming up. And you'd click on the next fixture, and it would then bring up a list of pledges. And these pledges range from using a reusable cup to going vegan 2 days a week to installing solar panels. Mm-hmm. There's about 65 on there. And this makes them really accessible, but also it kind of draws people in to a degree, because you see things on there you're already doing, and you maybe don't realise the impact of it. So it makes the impact of it visible. Yeah. But you also see things on there that you can very easily do, and things that you can work towards. And it kind of, certainly the research that we did, it gives people this kind of instant raised consciousness. Yeah. So you make one or a number of pledges in support of Liverpool. Yeah. It quantifies how much emissions you will save by carrying out those pledges per year. Mm-hmm. And it tallies that alongside your fellow fans. Okay. So you, as a Liverpool fan, and your fellow fans would beat the opposition if you collectively pledged to save more. Then the cumulative amount pledged to be saved determines your team's standing within the Pledgeball League. So in fact, I know Liverpool women actually feature quite highly on there, because they have an amazing supporters trust who've really advocated for Pledgeball. Incredible. Pledging around there.
Amazing. So this is in tandem with the actual fixtures that are happening, say, in the Premier League or the EFL or whatever. Exactly. So right. When you're looking for fixtures,
exactly, all the way at all tiers of the football pyramid. So you'll see all of those fixtures on there. And the league table at the moment, all teams from all areas of the football pyramid exist within the same league. Now that may change as we kind of incorporate more partners later on. But at the moment, for example, Bristol City currently sit top, the Championship club. And in second place, we have, in fact, our pilot club, White Hawk FC, the amazing White Hawk FC, who play in the Pitching and Isthmian League. So, there's different teams from different tiers who all compete. It's pretty cool.
Amazing. So tell us then about the research behind pledges, because I know we've had this conversation before about it, and I think it's a really important point to note in terms of the research you've done around this, because the sort of devil's advocate would say, so someone like me, I'm naturally, obviously, my work and my life, I am mainly plant-based. I don't really drive that frequently. It's usually active or public transport. I, wash everything at a low grade wash, etc. If I'm doing that stuff and already and I pledge, does that still count? Or what if I pledge with the best of intentions and don't do it? So talk to us about the research, because I know you've done a huge amount of research around, broadly the findings when people pledge. And I think that's a really important part of this conversation as well, isn't it, in terms of changing people's hearts and minds?
It's really key. So I think what we have to do is take it right back to the beginning, when we decided, what impact do we want to have? Now, a lot of research shows that actually simply increasing awareness around climate change isn't actually going to lead anyone to action. most people don't engage with climate change because they have this huge sense of powerlessness and paralysis in the face of it, because it's such a huge problem. And as an individual, you can feel completely powerless.
Yeah.
And it's about shifting that perspective, shifting that mindset. And so that we start to carry this kind of carbon currency in our heads, that as we go about our daily lives, every single decision is influenced by our knowledge of the impact we can have, and the belief that as an individual, especially as part of a collective, we can actually have a really significant impact. And that's true. I mean, 2/3 of emissions are directly linked to household emissions. The recent IPCC report in February demonstrated that they said between 40 to 70% of emissions could be cut directly by supporting lifestyle and behavior changes. Yeah. So we have a huge amount of power. And even as individuals, that individual change also feeds into the systemic change, simply by our shopping or voting with our feet. People who start to feel more empowered then start to engage with literature around climate change, and that then influences how you vote, for example. So it's just a starting point. Now, the reason our pledges are so simple to do, and as you said, anybody could cheat. And in fact, we've only ever had one person cheat. And I won't tell you which team.
No. Well, did they tell you? How did you know they cheated?
No, well, I mean, I'd assume they cheated because they ticked every single pledge.
Right. You were like, come on. Maybe they were just incredible. Maybe they were just
maybe
like,
they were doing it. Maybe
I'm
completely unfair. But I mean, it really is about having the barrier to entry as low as possible, because this is integrated into match day. And I mean, fans can pledge, in the lead up to the game, and the clubs, the supporters trust encourage pledging in the lead up during the game. So, clubs have been putting on their scoreboards in stadium, in concourse, so you can see the live score. So fans can pledge during the game and right up until midnight on match day. So afterwards, particularly if the team has been successful and therefore people want to engage more on the pitch, then you can also pledge up to midnight on match day. So we want it to be as easy as possible. Because the other key thing is that you trigger conversations. So you plant a seed by simply engaging with the Pledgeball process. And this is what the research showed. As I touched upon before, it demonstrated that when people go through it, they found it, and I quote, somehow gave them optimism and confidence, because as I said, they could see things they're already doing, and it made the impact of that visible. But it also made visible the fact that they were part of a collective of people taking action. So both fellow fans, but also people across the country. It made visible the fact that, all that research shows that 80% of people roughly support climate action, but we don't normally see that. There's a big attitude behavior gap. So making it visible makes people realize that they are part of this group taking action. It's like if you walk down the street and you see, for example, somebody picking up litter, you're much more inclined to pick up litter yourself because you don't feel like you're on your own doing it. And it's exactly that kind of theory. The other thing is that if we were to ask people to verify it, the only way we could probably do it is with a photo, really. We gave quite a lot of thought to it. And actually, that instantly introduced a barrier that we didn't want to have. And it only would give us a snapshot in time of what they were doing. So instead, what we wanted to do was carry out this big piece of academic research to really assess the impact on both individuals' mindsets, but also their awareness and likelihood to take action. And so when we launched our pilot club back in September 2020, which was White Hawk, I very fortuitously met a research fellow called Dr. Mark Doidge from the University of Brighton, who is an expert in football fandom. He's since managed to recruit him as a trustee to the charity. But I asked him to design a piece of research that I could carry out to assess the impact of Pledgeball. And luckily for me at the time, intern to him was a master's student called Jenny Aman, who was a student from the University of Gothenburg. And she actually ended up carrying out her master's thesis on the potential for mobilizing football fans around climate change and how these fans experience Pledgeball. And I mean, I've given you some of the key findings from that, but there were other things beside. I mean, I said it gave them all instant raised consciousness. It improved their optimism, but it also made them see their kind of place in this broader social context. They felt more in touch. They also, it shifted their relationship with change in general. So even outside of just environmental sustainability, they could see that they had more of a place, and they could see that change was not something to not like or be fearful of, but actually they had quite a lot of fun experimenting with these things. So they started, for example, sharing vegan recipes on the WhatsApp chat that already existed. Yeah. And so you're already sparking these conversations in places where you wouldn't normally have those conversations.
Yeah, which is incredible. And this idea of collective action as well, I think is so important around it. But I'm always conscious as well, even when you're chatting in terms of the stats around individual action, that we don't put too much responsibility on individuals where corporations, governments, etc. should be, taking on a lot of responsibility around emissions and changing the ways. But we also can't get away from the fact that as long as those organisations have people voting for them, or consumers buying the products, or citizens consuming their products, that they aren't going to have the impetus to change unless it's demanded. So I think what I really like is this idea of more collective action, of being a larger part of a whole, rather than us feeling as though individually it's our problem to solve, which I think, to your point, and I've been hearing this a lot more actually from younger people recently about this eco-anxiety and this, literally the idea of like, why should I bother going to uni? Why should I bother doing this stuff? Because, the future's going to be a whole load of crap anyway. We're not going to end up here. So why should I invest in my future when this happens? And that's terrifying to hear from a younger generation. And I think that paralysis, as you said, of the fear around what this could look like in the future is really overwhelming, especially to young people. So for collective action and being part of something bigger, and this idea of pledging and moving forward and connecting it with stuff they love around sport, etc., is a wonderful idea to help drive that forward.
I mean, you're absolutely right. And the key thing to note here is it's entirely about this. I mean, this is the other thing from the research. It's entirely about individual agency. There's there's no requirement. It's not compulsory to get involved. It's there, and it's a way of engaging and demonstrating this collective action, but you don't have to. The other key thing that you brought up there is obviously it has to be a multi-pronged thing. When we look at transformational change, there are certain kind of spheres that we look at, and there's the individual agency, but there's also the practical, the infrastructure that's there. And those two things both have to kind of complement each other. You have to have individuals making those decisions. You don't want that to be enforced, but you need governments, organisations to provide this supportive structure. And I mean, to a degree, this is also where sporting organisations could play this really key role, because actually they have a huge amount of impact. They are part of often a city, a town, they're a really key part of that. And so actually, for example, where stadiums work with local councils on public transport, actually their legacy can extend outside of match day. It can provide those supportive structures in everyday life. And so by facilitating that really, helps to drive things forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And that the reach of it is massive. So tell me, I mean, so how long has Pledgeball been going, and how have you seen it evolve in that time, in terms of sort of the progress or the change in mentality or the change in the sort of landscape around the work?
I mean, so as you said, it kicked off this little grassroots tournament was in 2019. So the only requirement of that was that everybody had to pledge to enter the tournament. And we had a prize for the team that pledged to save the most submissions, a prize for the team who'd actually scored the most goals or won the most games. From there, obviously I spoke with you. And then we launched with our pilot club in September 2020. So about a year later from that, carried out this piece of research. And it was subsequent to that, we started to recruit a few more partners. Again, did some more monitoring and evaluation on that. And now we're at a point where we're working with quite a number of different partners, like stakeholders across the football community. So in the same way that you want that multi-pronged approach in terms of the individual and the structural, the organizational level, we also want that multi-pronged approach in that we involve, supporters groups. We're partnered with the Football Supporters Association, which is, I mean, I'll maybe come back to because that is just an amazing partnership. But we're also partnered with clubs, because then clubs are promoting this and can also support fans with carrying out certain pledges. They can remove certain barriers to pledging. But we also have the individual supporters advocating for this. And this is what's really key. We worked with an amazing group of climate engagement specialists called Climate Outreach, who've written a lot of publicly available pieces of research on the most effective ways of engaging around climate change. And we were lucky enough to be selected as innovation partners of theirs.
Amazing.
And one of the things that they really focus on is that if you're going to bring about change, really true transformational change, you need to have your peers talking to you about this. It's that peer and community support. And so with the supporters trusts advocating for this, that's where you can really get that, because they're already completely familiar with and ingrained within their own communities. So if you can start having these conversations around what you as an individual are doing, and again, climate outreach is research demonstrates that this is what's really effective in terms of communicating climate change, sharing those personal stories, then others within that community will start to listen, and you can share the difficulties and carry on with that process. And this is what the partnership with the Football Supporters Association aims to do, in that we worked with those incredible supporters trusts who are all volunteers and all work within these individual communities, know them really well, know what barriers and stresses everybody is facing, but supports them all together to get on board with this and to all take the steps that they can.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those who don't know, I think the FSA is probably the dominant football soccer supporters association in the UK. I think they have like 600,000 members. Like they're vast, aren't they, in terms of their reach into local fan community support groups?
Exactly right. Yeah.
So that's brilliant in terms of that. And the partnerships, you mentioned Spirit of Football, etc. as well. And again, in terms of their work, there's loads of stuff going on there. So how crucial have partnerships been to your growth in terms of what Pledgeball's doing and how you're moving forward?
That's a really good question. It's absolutely huge, the partnerships, because I think you touched upon it earlier. What's really key is that we embed this in something that people already enjoy and participate in. And this is what's amazing about sport. And it's worth really highlighting, by the way, that whilst we primarily work with football fans, actually Pledgeball has another facility that is used by other sports, and in fact outside of sports, that can be very widely applied, and again allows individual sports and organizations to take ownership of it, adapt it to their communities, and it just is an easy way of them promoting climate action and supporting it. But the partnerships are absolutely key, because we want to meet people where they're at with things that already engage with. I mean, you're only going to see transformational change if you incorporate it into something that people emotionally engage with and emotionally identify with. And they do that with sport. I mean, you don't see anybody in any other kind of area of their life emotionally engaging on such a regular basis. Like, you don't get those highs and lows anywhere else. I nowhere else do I go and dance around like an idiot if I've scored a goal. Have that kind of thing. So it's about meeting people where they're at, and therefore you need to use the platforms that are already there. So these partnerships also allow not only the platform, but also the knowledge of their communities, their fan bases, and allowing the flexibility for them to adapt the mechanism so that it suits those individuals, means that you're getting, as I said, that peer-to-peer engagement. And so they're absolutely crucial. I mean, going back to the Spirit of Football one, actually, that's a really fun one, because Spirit of Football basically are a community interest company. They've been around about 15 years, I think. I hope I haven't got it wrong. Jurgen Klopp has been their ambassador for a good few years now. And essentially what they do is they take a ball, kicking it off at Battersea in London, home of modern day rules football, and they carry it across various countries to wherever the World Cup is being held. And each time they carry a message with that, and they run workshops along the way, and people sign this ball, demonstrating they're signing up to this message. And this year, it's about promoting and inspiring and learning about climate action happening across the world. So we are their key partners for that. And essentially, as people sign up to the ball, they will also be signing up to these pledges. So we'll be able to see this huge global map of climate action that's happening across the world. It will give us the opportunity to showcase as well climate action that's happening that we don't normally see. So, in various Indigenous communities, the climate action that's happening there, but also how they're impacted there by climate change. And they will be able to feed into the global pledge list that we're going to be generating, both using research, but also along the way through meeting these communities, from them feeding into that, so that it just makes the climate action across the world visible.
Yeah, and this is what it's all about, isn't it? I think there's so much work to be done. The more we can partner and the more we can share the learnings and cross-pollinate ideas, and as you said, meet people where they are, the quicker we're going to be able to hopefully drive some impact through the work we're having in terms of tackling these massive problems. So it's brilliant to hear about the partnerships and driving that sort of action. I'm just thinking, if I'm listening to this and I'm learning about Pledgeball for the first time, and I'm thinking, this is brilliant. Maybe we're in a different part of the world, maybe we're a different sport or whatever, but we want to engage more with our fans and maybe drive our fans to make pledges or to just drive changes in their lives, and we want to try and help instigate that. Is there any learnings or anything that you've picked up along the way that you think this is a real transferable sort of nugget of information that you could share with any sport organizer who has a fan base that could help them drive that action with their fans?
Such a good question.
If the answer is, give me a minute, that's fine. I'm just thinking, like, you just through all of this.
No, there's so much immediately come to my head. Yeah. I mean, I think the first thing I'd say is just do it, because people are afraid to take that first step because, as I said, it's not immediately visible that people care. But when you look at the research, the very vast majority of people do care. And actually, it'll be relief that somebody's taking a lead on it.
Yeah.
And those conversations have been facilitated. So, yeah, firstly, just do it, get involved.
Yeah.
Secondly, look for ways in which it would suit your community. So adapt it to whatever you think would work. So, the Pledgeball events facility, we'd been asked, for example, we don't normally work with schools, but we'd been asked to go and speak in a school locally to me. And the Pledgeball events facility basically allow anybody to set up what we call a Pledgeball event, which is essentially a listing on the website, and it's there for any period of time.
Right.
And all it requires is that everybody who enters that event makes a pledge to get involved, and it feeds back to them, therefore, what quantity of emissions as a collective you've pledged to save and what that equates to in terms of how many cars it equates to taking off the road, just something to make it more tangible. Yeah. Now, the really great thing about it was that these kids just ran with it, and the degree of, or the range of events was awesome, because we had dance-offs, we had bake-offs, we had online gaming tournaments, and it's just about adapting it to the community. It's not rocket science, and it's just, again, about planting that seed about what you could do, getting people through that door. So yeah, a key thing would be just do it. It doesn't need to be complex.
Yeah.
Also, reach out and speak to other people. I mean, please reach out to us. There's so many people willing to help. I mean, when I reached out to you, Claire, as I said, that was a real starting point for me. You gave me so much time when we were such a tiny organisation. And that's what's kind of allowed it to become what it is. So there are so many people willing to support in this space, but also be confident in your own knowledge. You don't need to be a scientist to encourage action.
Yeah.
Use the fact that you know and can empathise with those people around you. You know what will drive them to start to take action and to believe that they as individuals can have an impact. Yeah. So yeah, just get on with it.
Nice. That's my mantra. Just crack on. Just crack on. You don't have to wait for permission. Just do it. And I think that's, it's great advice, because I think, again, we do hear this a lot across all different sports of kind of like, we're not an expert. We don't want to alienate fans. There's so much going on already. How do we get the message across, in what way? But you're right. I think when we, especially for communications experts, when they step away, they know sport and they know fans and they know what lands. So you just need to use that same metric and apply an environmental side or a climate side or a recycling, whatever the angle is for it. You know your fans. Those communication experts know their fans, and they might not know climate change to a scientific level, but they understand what resonates with their fans, and hopefully that'll be a driver for them to engage in this, around this metric as well.
Exactly right. And I mean, you also talked about knowing their fans and knowing what drives them. Often it's on a local level. People find it very, very difficult to connect with anything they think is happening somewhere else, even though within sport we can already see the impact of climate change. It's still very difficult to connect it often. And I mean, the other thing with that is, I guess, that we didn't mention, was to steer away from the doom and gloom messaging, because that really turns people off. I mean, research is very clear on that. People just cannot engage because they feel like it's something that they have no control over as an individual. So instead, focus on the local, boil it down to simple questions like, do you want clean air to breathe when you're going for a run? Simple as that. Do you want the streets to be clean? It's talking about it in something that makes sense to us, because when we boil climate change down to those simple questions, then of course everybody supports it and wants to take action. It's just that it's such an abstract concept when you look at it overall.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant advice. And then to that, to that idea, looking just a little bit more broadly, having heard, so much about the work you're doing, which is incredible, but more broadly, if we look at sort of the role of climate change within sport or sustainability in sport, where do you think we are right now in terms of, the efforts that are being undertaken? How positive do you feel about the efforts that are being undertaken and the challenges ahead and the barriers that we've got to overcome, etc.? You've obviously been in it for a few years now. You've seen a lot evolve in that time. Where do you think we are in this journey towards sort of using the full potential of sport to play a role in tackling climate change?
I think we're at the cusp of a wave. I mean, there is more and more clamour from all sides for environmental sustainability to genuinely be addressed. And we're starting to see that play out into things that matter in the short term to stakeholders. So, we're starting to see the commercial benefits of it. There was a piece of research put out that demonstrated that, stakeholders that genuinely address sustainability can increase revenue by 10%, 11%. We're also starting to see it written into licensing. So, for example, the Bundesliga now has a really, I'm assured, very thorough requirement for clubs to address sustainability that's written into the licensing there.
Yeah.
And it's as those types of things start to happen where you see the immediate benefits of it in a financial sustainability sense, that actually we're going to start to see that environmental sustainability is always part of those decisions, because that's really what has to happen from an individual level and from an organizational level. I mean, I mentioned before this carbon currency, but it goes beyond that. It goes to environmental sustainability, not just carbon footprint. That needs to be integral to every decision that is made. And I am starting to see that movement. There is still obvious barriers, and a lot of that is down to the capacity that individuals have, both in terms of their brain space, I guess, but also financial. So when you see, for example, people working roles at clubs, there are very few who have a head of sustainability role. Most people currently share the role of sustainability because they are interested individually in it. And therefore they have to balance that alongside their other jobs. But it also means they have to fight for space with other departments, for example, within that organization. So it needs to become something that, all stakeholders basically have the capacity to address, and it's seen as absolutely crucial, and that it also filters out throughout the organization. So every single decision takes into account immediately the environmental sustainability angle. And, people will see, as I said, from a financial side, a real benefit to this. But we are at the cusp of a wave now. And I think those people who get on it now will be jumping on board and leading the way. The others will have to follow. And I don't think it'll be that long before they do.
No. And I think this is it. I think we were at an event recently, weren't we, where you were in the session. I heard about the session. It was quite eye-opening in terms of some people more broadly who perhaps feel very hamstrung by the financial need to be sustainable, or what the financial side looks like to be sustainable. And also what sort of worried me the most in terms of feedback was is it our responsibility to be, which I think is again very eye-opening, because the people in our community, we are in a bubble in terms of we're constantly talking to people that this is a priority, the progress is being made, etc. And that to me is always pause for thought in terms of the size of sport globally and the organisations that are leading in this. They're brilliant, and the amount of progress we've seen over the past few years. But again, hearing little snippets of that does ground us again into, we are, as you said, the cusp where there's been so much progress. Maybe we're at the cusp of a wave of more and more progress, which is what we want. But we still can't rest on our laurels, and we can't think everyone gets this now and that everyone, it's a given that everyone understands the value of this, because that gave me pause in terms of, especially within our role in the community, that we can't just talk to people with a presumptive tone that this makes sense and everyone's doing it, because it's still not the case. And I still think there's work to be done. But the likes of hopefully Pledgeball and others who are doing this work that are driving fans towards this, I think just massively helps this effort, because if sports organisations hear it from fans, it becomes the number one priority.
Yeah, there's a number of really interesting key things you brought up there. One is, you're right, we completely exist in a bubble. And so we absolutely have to make sure those conversations are happening everywhere. I mean, I'd also say that from the other angle, some stakeholders exist in their bubble where they can't see what's coming. And in that, as I said, those who jump on now will be ahead of that curve. But that curve is coming pretty quickly. So there needs to jump on now.
Yeah.
The fans thing you're absolutely right about. I mean, fans are driving this, and you only need to look at the stats to see that this is totally invisible actually a lot of the time, but so many fans, the very large majority of fans support this. Yeah, I mean, if we're going to really accelerate it, it needs to be introduced into licensing so that those people who are in other roles and are bogged down by the roles, their KPIs also incorporate environmental sustainability and very high up in them. It has to be written in there, because otherwise other things are just going to be prioritized because they're only thinking of the short term, and that's just what we do.
Yeah. And I think that's fascinating as well, because I have a lot of offline conversations where people who are driving this individually at global sports organizations say to me, I couldn't publicly say that we want this to happen, but if it was mandatory and it had to happen, resource would be found, time would be attributed, and it would make life a lot simpler for those who are trying to drive it internally, because there's no choice. The same way as through other elements of sport that are governed, this would become part of that, and it would be normalized, and it would have to happen. As you said, Bundesliga with their licensing, we now see it with the EFL Trust in terms of environmental sustainability being part of the capability code of practice, new for this season, which is great. But again, nowhere near the level that we need it to be at yet. But that, I think for sure, in terms of, as we see, in every industry in the world, in terms of regulatory changes, as soon as something becomes mandatory and part of guidelines, processes, reporting, then it has to be done. And I think the closer we, as you said, the closer we can get to that, and the more quickly we can get to that, the better it's going to be for all of us.
Exactly. I mean, stakeholders will be grateful for that, because as I said, you have individuals within the clubs, and actually more than individuals, but you have a lot of people who personally want to drive this and are trying to drive it, through. Yeah. But it's not given a priority because they have to focus on other things. So I think there'll be a lot of gratitude actually from stakeholders that this became something that everybody had to address rather than focusing on something else.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something we really need to hear more about as well and get more on. And it's certainly something that we'll be covering at the summit this year as well in October, in terms of that idea of what that looks like, how you get there, and what the benefits of that are, which I think is absolutely crucial. So I'm conscious of time. Oh, go on, please carry on.
I was only going to say, I think the other key thing to think about with regards to this is also the fear that people have, and this certainly came up in the forum you referred to, the fear that organisations and individuals have about stepping up and taking action. Yeah. That you're opening yourself up to potential criticism. And we need to change the narrative around this. Everybody is on this journey. Nobody is perfect. And we don't need a few people being perfect, but we need everyone doing things imperfectly. And that will have such a significant impact. So we need to, and I guess the media in particular could play a role in this, in that we need to start having that narrative of showcasing what is being done and what is being worked towards, but without it, immediately. We need to challenge greenwashing, obviously. But also there needs to be that element of, yes, they're starting on this genuinely authentic journey. They are actually genuinely working towards this, and this is the utmost they can currently do.
Yeah, absolutely. No, there's so much good stuff there, so much to think about as well, which is awesome, which is what we want, new ideas. So in terms of the hope for the future, in terms of Pledgeball, in terms of, the movement and sport and sustainability, where would you love to see this in 10 years' time?
In 10 years' time, I would love to see this integrated into leagues in terms of football internationally, and taken, in other sports where leagues are also generated, so that fans can engage alongside their, the athletes competing on the pitch or on the courts or whatever else. Yeah. That fans are also engaging off the pitch, off the courts, and they are therefore integrating this into the match days. And it's recognised, so that the league refreshes every year in the same way that, leagues do refresh every year, and that it's awarded with meaningful prizes, so that this conversation constantly happens and that visibility is constantly there.
Yeah, amazing. Well, fingers crossed. I'd love to see that.
Just a little ask.
I'd love to see that. Well, hey, we have to be ambitious, because climate change is ploughing on, and we're going to have to see wide scale transformation in terms of if we are going to tackle this problem, if we are going to tackle this massive crisis. So I do think we have to think big, and we have to make sure that the work is ambitious and that the groundwork's laid to get there, because we have to play our part in this. So it's amazing to hear from you. Is there any last thoughts you'd like to leave us with in terms of Pledgeball, the work that you're doing, and the organisations that you're working with?
I think one of the things that I always, I guess, consider when it comes to climate change is a lot of people feel real, despair about the fact that actually it feels very slow. Are we actually going to be able to tackle it? But also the other way of looking at it, lots of people aren't taking action, but the other way of looking at it is that there's a huge amount of people who care, who haven't yet been supported to take action. And so there's a huge amount of skills there, huge numbers, and therefore huge potential to drive really radical change. We always assume that all the answers have all been found and we'll never be able to play a part in answers. And that's absolutely rubbish. Going back to the message that I'd give people just to get on with it, you don't realise the potential for change that you can drive. So I think probably that would be my parting pearl.
That's a good one. I love it. Yeah, realise that, and the amount of untapped potential. Again, we're at the start of this journey, even though we've seen great progress. We're at the start of the journey. There's a long way to go with it. And as you said, the fact that we presume how people think or how people feel or what they're open to isn't realised, is it? It isn't true, it isn't factual. It's just what we think or what we think right now, and that's going to evolve constantly. So amazing advice, brilliant to chat to you, and always a pleasure in terms of your enthusiasm and everything you've already done with Pledgeball, and we can't wait to see what's next as well. I'm sure there's loads of exciting things happening that we'll be hearing about soon. So thanks so much. That was Katie Cross, founder of Pledgeball, and join us next week for more Climate of Sport action on the podcast. Thanks for listening to the Climate of Sport podcast. Please like and subscribe, and get in touch if you want to share information about the work that you're doing, if you want to appear as a guest, or you want to recommend guests, or you just have ideas of conversations you'd like us to have. You can get in touch by emailing info@sportpositivesummit.com.